Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks especially to Chris for rescuing Rachel and myself this morning. We had car trouble. Okay, Jake and Tilly, guess what we think is wrong with the car? Yeah. We've had a pattern recently. Thanks also to Chris for being a fount of helpful information, which is especially valuable because my UU congregation, Sacred Path, fell apart some years ago, and there were just lots of details of service I'd kind of forgotten. Also, the last time I was physically here at Heartland was for an evening event focusing on police violence, and today feels quite different, so thank you so much. And I want to let everyone here know that I have not fully absorbed the new UU Shared Values framework. It's not that I have a problem with it, it's just that I still think in terms of the 7 principles and 6 sources, so that's what I'll reference today. And I want to give a huge thanks to my former colleague and still friend Jen Midkiff. Jen and I met when we started teaching at Brebeuf in fall 2005, so a little more than 20 years ago. She taught choirs and music. I taught social studies, mostly American history classes. And way before I knew I was going to ask Jen to be here today, a story about the two of us was vital to the earliest draft of this sermon, and I'm not going to mention it all today. So I'm even more grateful that you get to be here and that you're willing to share your incredible musical skills with us, so thank you, Jen. All right, there are a few reasons that I wanted us to hear the Alcoholics Anonymous story of the development of the Serenity Prayer. I've grown convinced that this is one of the few prayers most Americans know, and even at that basic level, we know it in lots of different forms and from lots of different physical spaces. I know at least that I've seen this prayer so many places on so many different kinds of objects, and I've been a teacher for a long time, so I think I should just ask, and hopefully it's okay to have a little audience participation, even in a UU church. Where have you seen the Serenity Prayer, just out in the world? Where have you seen it?
Overeaters Anonymous and AA.
Oh, okay. So multiple anonymous groups, please.
Another made a needlepoint.
Lots of needlepoint through the years. Yes. Anyone else? Some physical object you remember seeing? Right?
Refrigerator.
Yes. Kitchen towels, throw pillows, who knows where else. I started thinking about it as being kitsch, and I don't think it's kitsch. I think it's just generic, just default American culture. And I think that matters, and I'll say more about that a little bit later. How many folks already knew that this was a Reinhold Niebuhr quote? That prayer? Okay, a few folks did, but I think I always grew up with seeing it anonymous. I don't know what that says. Okay, I think I do know what it says, but I don't want to believe it. So I'm going to ask us to spend a little bit of time thinking about the Serenity Prayer and what it means that it's ubiquitous and seemingly innocuous. It's everywhere and just kind of harmless. I'm going to submit to you that I think what most of us pull from this prayer is that it's just sort of generic belief that acceptance of one's condition should be viewed as a positive. It's a good thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do. That's part of why I want to share this additional quote from Niebuhr. He says, "The victorious man in the day of crisis is the man who has the serenity to accept what he cannot help and the courage to change what must be altered." I'm going to argue this morning that America is in a day of crisis. So garden variety serenity is not just unwise, it's also inappropriate. Okay, I think Chris warned you. My master's degree is in religious studies. My focus was on ethics. So to be honest, I would actually be really happy to just talk with you about Reinhold Niebuhr for the next 20 minutes. I feel very confident that I would feel like I were giving a much, much safer sermon if I did that. But that's probably not why you're here, and I'm sure that that's not why I was invited here. I'm here to talk about leaving America behind. And as I get ready to talk about spending half of 2025 in Canada, I want to publicly thank my much better half, Rachel Sipes. In more ways than I could possibly describe, Rachel sacrificed, adjusted, and believed enough to make Canada even a possibility. So thank you, Ray. She's been a constant light in the dark skies of my 2025. And the previous 25 years, too. Okay, I have to confess to all of you that if I'd listened to Rachel earlier and better, we might still be in Canada now. Rachel was convinced this time last year that Trump had a very good chance of getting back into the White House. And that meant that we should start considering our options. Of course, I knew that was the case based on polling, but I had way more hope and faith in the American people and in our history of expanding access to government. And if nothing else, I felt pretty confident that people would actually remember how horrible his first term was. And would be unwilling to go back to that miserable state of affairs. But Rachel kept warning me that misogynoir is so central to America that lots of folks would never vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, I knew there were lots, but I didn't believe there would be so many. As usual, Rachel was right, and what I have always thought of as my big balloon of belief in America got popped on election night. And by the morning after, I felt convinced that America had chosen a path to hell and done so willingly. That meant I wanted to leave. And as Rachel and I talked about it more, wanting to leave shifted pretty quickly to needing to leave. That shift came largely because for most of the past 20 years, in addition to U.S. history, I taught a class called Genocide and the Holocaust. It was almost exactly 20 years ago that I attended an international conference on genocide in London, Ontario. Many of the world's premier scholars were there, and they shared their expertise. And at the time, we were focused on the genocide in Darfur. That's why we were all there. I had the opportunity to chat with some of the Canadian generals who helped end the genocide in Rwanda. And I knew what I was learning was valuable and it was going to be important for me and for my students, but it hadn't occurred to me that what I was learning about authoritarianism would be incredibly relevant to life in America less than 20 years later. Well, with the help of an incredible village of people supporting our efforts, Rachel and I started making real plans to move to Canada. And I should give a special shout out to my boss at the time, Alicia Magdalene, head of school at University High School. Alicia allowed me some time off so that Rachel and I could scout different Canadian cities. We didn't know where to go. Alicia understood how scary this moment was for me, and she helped provide more light in my dark sky. We did all this with incredible urgency because it became very important to me that we be in Canada before Inauguration Day. I worried that Trump would create some kind of absurd American border policy. I know, wild, right? And I really worried that other countries might respond in kind and put limits on Americans. Nothing seemed off the table, and I didn't want to be stuck in the US. I truly thought I could fight better, more openly, and more safely from Canada. So even though moving absolutely everything, and selling our house so quickly was a ridiculous ask on my part, Rachel somehow made it happen anyway. That's because she shared some of my worries. She trusted that my study of authoritarianism showed that, yeah, we were going down a horrible path. And most importantly, Rachel worried for my emotional well-being. During the first Trump term, I developed really intense anxiety issues. I had such frequent panic attacks that driving from our home on the south side to 116th Street became close to impossible. We moved from our forever home, where Jake grew up, to a condo on the north side, so I would have a better chance of just daily functioning. That's how I responded to the first Trump administration. And remember, That administration was filled with generic Republicans and political folks whose loyalty was to the Constitution, not to Trump. It was also a time when Trump was still moderating himself because he was trying to win re-election. If I had more time, I would love to talk with you extensively about the 6 months or so we spent in Canada. It was incredibly complicated and ultimately really rewarding time. Maybe there'll be some opportunity for me to share that with some of you later. Maybe Rachel and I will really dig into it on a podcast, I'm not sure. What I am sure is that we moved back to the US because we needed to. It wasn't what we wanted, it wasn't freely chosen. But returning home has given us lots of reasons to think deeply about our Canadian experience, and I want to highlight just a few things that stand out. It's a cliche, but people really were nicer. Not super hospitable necessarily, but nicer. They were willing to help, share, extend grace, and in virtually every way, the province of Ontario was filled with far greater community than I experienced in the US. Okay, you ready? That's the best part. We made 4 friends. As grown adults, we made 4 new friends. So thank you, Dana, Finus, Ann, and Dave. I love you. We didn't know anybody when we got to Canada. And in a short period of time, we made these 4 genuine friends. These are people that offered helpful insights, valuable connections, a place to stay. And actually, right now, lots of our stuff is in a basement in Oshawa, Ontario, because we had to leave so quickly that we couldn't fully plan. But Ann and Dave happily offered to let us just store a carload of stuff in their basement. And all 4 of these amazing people provided vital light for us, often in literally dark northern skies. And there's one other thing about Canada that no one ever talks about, but Rachel and I both experienced. We felt safe. There was a much smaller police presence overall, but even when police were around, there was never a sense that they were particularly looking at me or looking at us. I was just another person and we were just another couple, and that never happens in America. I never feel entirely safe in public spaces in the US, and I shouldn't. Again, there's so much more to tell you about Canada, but I live here now. I live here, and my fears have been validated. There have been a few things that have surprised me in the past few months. For instance, I didn't assume that Trump would be so naked in his financial corruption. I'm guessing everybody knows by now that we've guaranteed Qatar the same level of national security as our NATO allies have had for the last 80 years. That's a great deal for one used plane. I also didn't imagine that the notion of a 3rd Trump term would be normalized so quickly. Everything else, pretty much what I expected, with one awesome big exception, which is that there's been no major public violence yet. I'm incredibly grateful for that, and also a little bit sad because the only reason it's true is because there's been so little public rebuke of this administration. Resistance crowds haven't been big enough for Trump to feel threatened. That's been the case that was the case yesterday in Indy, right?
Right.
And I'm sorry. Of course, this is also the reason that he's forcing the military into big cities. LA, DC, Chicago, now Portland. Portland? Trump is desperate for an excuse to shoot Americans. And it's not accidental. It's not coincidental. During his first term, he was told no again and again. You can't use the military to shoot civilians, but now there's no one to tell him no. And this is authoritarianism 101. Will the military follow the law or the leader? Once the military becomes internally directed at the behest of the strongman, resistance is far deadlier. I mean, why did ICE terrorize an apartment building in Chicago at 1 a.m.? Why does Trump keep shooting Venezuelan boats and bragging about it? It's all part of the process of eroding the lines between lawful and unlawful. And this is all part of why I reject our default, this sort of complacent serenity as exemplified by that one prayer that we all seem to know. I hope I don't have to say more to convince you that feeling serene in this moment is unwise. It's hard to imagine someone could believe in 7 UU principals and also feel good about the state of the US right now. But here's the tough part, at least for me. As of October 5th, 2025, serenity also feels really inappropriate. Lots of us desperately pretend that keeping our heads down will make us safe, but history tells us again and again how misguided that thinking is. And by the way, just because you happen to be safe right now doesn't mean your neighbors are. Your brown neighbors, your trans neighbors, your poor neighbors, your urban neighbors, they are all in peril right now. I knew y'all were gonna bring me back. Okay. Let me tell you where Rachel and I are right now. Okay. Well, we're relying on a ride back to McDonald's. But physically, we're living with my dad. And I thank him so much for making that not just acceptable, but truly positive in lots of ways. He continues to be an incredible blessing for us, generates lots of light in our skies. Rachel has a job. She's a learning center coordinator at my old high school. I expect to start a teaching job later this week. But we sold our house. We're starting our lives from scratch. Our lives are profoundly different and harder than they were this time last year. And America is profoundly different and worse. I've continued finding ways to resist. I suppose instead of fighting from a safe distance, I'm fighting from where I stand these days. Again, one of our Canadian friends and I have started a new podcast. It's called Sunlight Express, and the hope is to provide a platform for people who are bringing light into the world. We need it so much. Now I'm on the steering committee for the Indiana chapter of Writers for Democratic Action, and as always, I'm helping some of my former students organize. That's kind of what happens when you're the rabble-rousing teacher for 20 years. Sometimes the rabble end up rousing you. So I'm grateful for them. I titled this talk, Seeing Light in Dark Skies. And I'm guessing you can understand that my skies seem pretty fucking dark right about now. But that's why I'm incredibly grateful for all the people who've provided me light this year. But I want to ask all of us to consider how we can collectively provide the brightest possible light to America's skies. I know you'll keep bringing light to people close to you, your UUs, that's what you do. So let me bring Niebuhr back into this space. Again, here's this quote. The victorious man in the day of crisis is the man who has the serenity to accept what he cannot help and the courage to change what must be altered. What do you choose to do in crisis? For Niebuhr, living in Detroit in the 1920s, the crisis at hand was the dominance of the Ku Klux Klan. Many of you know that in Indiana, that dominance was only shattered upon the brave death of Madge Oberholzer. That young lady used her deathbed to highlight the inhumanity of the Klan here. For Niebuhr, the situation was quite different. In a very real way, for a young white Protestant minister in the 1920s, aligning himself with the Michigan KKK would have been not just normal, but expected and valuable. Instead, he fervently fought against them, risking not just his career, but his life to secure safety for other people. And it worked. Instead of accepting the power of the Klan and his privileged place in the society it wanted, Niebuhr did the hard right thing and fought tooth and nail for the society he wanted. One of the concepts I love within the UU tradition is the phrase, multiply joy, divide sorrow. Rachel and I use that idea frequently. And I want to suggest a variation that applies to this crisis day. Multiply strengths and divide weaknesses. Anytime you construct a division of labor for a task, that's what you want to do, right? Well, the task I'm challenging us to take on today is a massive one that will require more strength and collective action than any in our lifetimes. I'm asking each and every one to find some way to help bring light to America. I have no doubt that we all want this country to live out our fifth principle concerning the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process, not just within our congregations, but in society at large. I want to ask us to be like Reinhold Niebuhr, not falling into the false trap of serenity, but in doing the hard right thing, fighting desperately for the society you want to live in. And I want to close by reminding you that America's skies, yes, are incredibly dark today. And the only light we can count on right now is us. People of goodwill who are brave enough to recognize this as a day of crisis, and that responding to that crisis requires us to move from a place of serenity to fervently fighting for the goal of achieving dignity, not just for us as individuals, but for every single person. So as we end our time together, I want to bring into our shared space and our collective consciousness yet another reinterpretation of the Serenity Prayer, this one perhaps called the Dignity Prayer. Life, give me the wisdom to accept that all things cannot be changed immediately. Give me the courage to work boldly to change things which must be changed. And remind me to center human dignity in every moment of my fight for peace, freedom, and justice. Blessed be.